Fantastic. I'm so glad you guys invited me back. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I have a story to tell to start off with, like I usually do. And as most of you know, I grew up in Michigan. But when I was in the 5th grade, let me get my water bottle. I think I'm going to need it here at some point.
Something's going on.
Yeah, it's probably all the smoke in the air, truthfully. Okay, so in 5th grade, I was in a split classroom. It was half 5th graders and half 6th graders. And I believe this practice has fallen by the wayside now. I haven't heard of any of my grandkids doing it. None of my kids did it. But it was very common when I was a kid to have a classroom that had 2 grades in it. So I don't know if the more adept 5th graders were mixed with average 6th graders, or they took low-achieving 6th graders and put them with average 5th graders to make a class. But I know it was a challenge for the teacher. And one snowy afternoon, our teacher, his name was Mr. Beagle. He was huge. He was like 6'2", giant bald head. The last person, if you looked at him, you would think would be a 5th or 6th grade teacher. He was working with the 6th graders at the front of the room. So the 5th graders, there was probably 12 of us, much smaller class sizes back in the day. We were supposed to be working individually on some sort of seat work project. So we were gathered around 2 small tables in the back of the classroom. And a lot of times when he had to divide the class like that, he would put on classical music as kind of like a little sound barrier so he could talk to the group he was talking to, and the other group essentially was entertaining or educating themselves. And that day, he had put on Faraday Groffe's Grand Canyon Suite, if any of you are familiar with it. And if you haven't heard it before, it's 5 movements that depict scenes from the Arizona landmark. And what I didn't realize when Groffe wrote this, he actually drew on memories of a vacation he had taken like 20 years before he wrote the piece, which to me is just amazing in itself. But the first movement, Sunrise, is a musical painting of a quiet sunrise over the desert. And following sunrise, we move through the painted desert. The most popular movement is called On the Trail, but it sounds like a burro ride. And you hear the clump, 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 clump. Groffe was one of the first ones to use those kinds of sound effects in what was considered classical music. The burro rides down the trail. You then end up with sunset, and at the very last piece is a movement called Cloudburst. And Cloudburst has been described as the most pictorial of the 5 movements. So from across the tranquil desert, you hear a storm approaching. The orchestra seems to become nature herself as the thunder rolls in and the lightning flashes, and then rain arrives in torrents, only to disappear as fast as it started. And the landscape returns to serenity as the music ends with quiet nightfall. Now, I was supposed to be drawing or writing something or reading something, but as I was wont to do in middle school, I was looking out the window. And as that final movement, that cloudburst began, it looked like the music was perfectly timed with the weather that was going on outside. The snow was swirling and dancing around. And as that orchestral storm reached its crescendo, so did the winter wind. It stirred up so much snow that I couldn't see the frozen playground across the way. And then as the music died down, the snow settled into this glimmery blanket, dusting the swings and the slides with this crazy, crazy sparkle to them. But by the end of the movement, the wind was gone, the sun was back out, and there was no trace of the little windstorm, snowstorm that I had just seen. But I felt like I had been clued into some kind of universal truth, that stories exist without words. And my 12-year-old brain probably went a little bit that day before was a thing. But that revelation that day opened the door for me to move towards understanding how we as humans tell stories. And it made me curious about storytelling and music and how we as people relate our stories sometimes through music. And for a long time, I would have told you I am not a storyteller, mostly because I thought of myself as a musician. And those were not the same thing. Storytellers have puppets or props or at least a range of dramatic voices. They move around the stage and they swing their arms and they emote. That certainly wasn't me. I was a flute player. But with age comes wisdom, they say, and I have since discovered that while I'm not a storyteller in that sense, I do tell a story. And we are all storytellers because we are living, breathing stories ourselves. We are each a walking narrative, a constant, quiet, ever-working explanation of who I am, why I matter, and what is happening to me, and why is this happening to me. We are always telling this story too. We tell other people who we are, and not just with words. We relate ourselves through the clothes we wear, the people we call friends, the jobs we choose to take on. 1,000 ways a day, we are telling the world who we are. This is our external story, both with and without words. But more importantly, we are telling ourselves our story. In this telling, we may believe that we are discovering ourselves. As we turn over events, considering our actions and reactions, we make decisions about who we are going to be and who we want to become and who we might have been. We take pride in actions and thoughts we decide to deem good, and we form internal opinions about what parts of us need more work. This internal narrative matters even more than the external, because not only are we discovering, we are creating. We are writing our own story that becomes the one that we share with the rest of the world. The creation of your story is not based on a cold, hard, literal interpretation of the facts as they are. You cannot dump all of your experiences into ChatGPT and prompt it to tell you who you are. Well, maybe you can, but I suspect the results would be definitely less than human. Instead, we are editing memories that we recall. We are framing our failures. We are interpreting our successes. We are crafting a narrative that starts with events, but is highly colored by interpretation. Take, for example, that two people can experience the exact same events and tell entirely different stories. You might say, I survived my hardship. You may say, I was shaped by my hardship. I was damaged by that hardship. Or I was awakened by that hardship. Same life, different souls, different filters. As you write the story, you're becoming the story. And as you are becoming the story, you're creating the story. It's an endless feedback loop, whether you are aware of it or not. It's not a script you are following. It's not a word-for-word narrative that you're living out. It is dynamic and subtle, and it feeds on itself while adding in bits from all your other experiences at the same time, simultaneously projecting your external story and revising your internal one. There's another suite of music that you may have heard of. It's called The Planets by Gustav Holst. It's 7 movements. Most people know a couple of them better than the rest of them, but it reflects the character of each planet as Holst interpreted them through his understanding of astrology, not astronomy, astrology. The suite took Holst 2 years to write, as he was working full-time at a regular day job and could only compose on nights and weekends, and he was compounded by a problem in his right arm that left him relying on students to assist with the actual writing of the scores. And it's a full orchestral piece. There's a lot of writing there. But the first movement is entitled Mars, the Bringer of War. Whether you're familiar with the astrological identity of Mars or not, this piece has a consistent effect on listeners. Since its premiere in September of 1918, the reaction has been the same: a sense of dread, imagery of a terrible conflict, the sounds of the machines of war. Now remember, in 1918, this was before World War I had begun. So the music even then evoked something that most people had not experienced on that. Without words, the music bypasses our verbal narrations. That music speaks directly to the pattern-making part of our mind. We could interpret it intellectually. We can say, of course that sounds like conflict because you're moving from a major chord into a series of minor and diminished chords accented by harmonic scale arpeggios. But we don't interpret music intellectually most of the time. When we hear it, we experience it as a story happening inside of us. The meaning of the music is not just received by you. It's not just handed to you in a neat little package by the composer. Here's my music. The meaning is a co-creation between the composer and your pattern-seeking brain and all the other narrative that you're carrying around inside of you. And once you've heard the music, it becomes, even in the tiniest of ways, a part of your story. And I was reminded all of this a few weekends ago. I was at the Florida Flute Association's annual convention in Orlando. I play in a flute choir in Jacksonville, and we were performing there. We actually commissioned a piece called about St. Augustine that we premiered. The composer was there. But it's a wonderful weekend. It happens the last weekend of January every year. It's flute music, it's workshops, it's a lot of camaraderie among flute players, all kinds. We've got professionals and students and adult amateurs like myself. And while I was there, I attended the performance of a flute choir playing the Moldau by Smetana. I'm going to say it's wrong, Smetana. And I've played this piece before in a concert band setting, not all flutes, but regular instrumentation. But this was the first time I had heard the composer's description of the piece. And this is what Smetana wrote. 2 springs pour forth in the shade of the Bohemian forest, one warm and gushing, the other cold but peaceful. The forest brook hastening on becomes the river Moldau. Through thick woods it flows as the gay sounds of the hunt and the notes of the hunter's horn are heard ever nearer. It flows through grass-grown pastures and lowlands where a wedding feast is celebrated with song and dance. At night, wood and water nymphs revel in its sparkling waves. Reflected on its surface are fortresses and castles, witnesses of bygone days of knightly splendor and the vanishing glory of fighting times. At the St. John Rapids, the stream races ahead, winding through the cataracts, hewing out a path with its foaming waves through the rocky chasm into the broad riverbed, finally flowing in its majestic peace toward Prague and welcomed by the time-honored castle Weistrad. Then it vanishes far beyond the poet's gaze. And I thought, of course, that's exactly what I heard. This is a long piece. It's about 12 minutes long. So in that time that it takes to listen to that music, and this time by a flute choir, it was easy to think about how very much people are like rivers. We stay the same, but we continually change along our paths. I'm not the same person I was the last time I played that piece. My body lost some cells, it grew some cells. My opinions have changed and evolved about all kinds of things. Some relationships have ended, some have changed, and some are yet to be. My story continues, though. Myself is not a fixed object as much as Jennifer standing here, as an interpretation flowing along with a reality filtered by all of my experiences. So whether I am playing music or listening to music, I realize that incorporation of my narrative is where I can access a form of spirituality. I don't control the story of the music. The music does not control my story. Both my story and my interpretation of the music influences me, though. I receive the patterns through the music, and I recognize the story that's happening without words. And that pattern, the music, has the power to interrupt the autobiography that is constantly being scripted and re-scripted and revised, whether I'm conscious of it or not. And in that space of being interrupted, I can feel awe. I can gain a sense of belonging. Music can show me grief moving through my body that I might have been aware of, and I can sense hope emerging. This opening of a spiritual door is frequently facilitated by the work of a person I will never meet. Classical composers in my world have been dead hundreds of years. But this work has been translated and gifted to me through their music, which seems kind of magical when you think about it. And I think that's my 12-year-old self felt. The passing on of a story through music is the pausing of my narrative that allowed me to see something I hadn't before, which of course got worked into the narrative as fast as it happened. So while the moment felt ephemeral and passing and as transient as the snow on the playground, it really wasn't. And so as we go out into the world after today's service, I would like to offer you a small spiritual practice, is to pay attention to the stories that you repeat to yourself about your life. Things like, I'm bad with people. Mine is, I'm bad with kids. I'm always the responsible one. I feel overlooked a lot. I struggle with this, whatever this is. These are like musical themes in your life, which means they don't have to remain the same. When you listen to the Moldau, the theme starts as a trickle, just kind of sneaks in. And by the end of it, it's a sweeping current as it rushes through those chasms. And it does this both musically, and it does that in real life. It starts out small as a little forest brook. So you have the power to turn those memories of pain, memories of suffering, into a source of compassion. You have the composer's authority to reinterpret the themes of your narrative. And you may have inherited some of these motifs from family stories, maybe your cultural identity or the events of your past, but you can decide what their role in your music is. You can choose a march, a hymn, a dance, an elegy. Spirit is present whenever you discover that you are empowered to retell your life with a meaning of your own choosing. You are the composer, the listener, the aficionado, and the critic. May we listen to our lives the way that we listen to music, curious, not judgmental, with a patience for the dissonance and understanding that the unresolved belong too. And when we cannot hear our own melody, may the community, like an orchestra of spirit, carry our theme until we can join again. May it be so.